Hello everybody, this is Jesse here, with another video, um, and this one's going to be kind of in regard to the monetary systems, and the downward spiral of the black horse as it continues to ride. I recently came across a video that was very astounding, and I heard another presentation of his before, which made a lot of sense. Now, bear in mind, this is coming from a secular source, so he's going to give you alternatives and ways to, look to the world to prevent for preventive maintenance, if you will, regarding certain crises that await us. And this is it's very interesting. It's a very interesting video, and I advise that you watch it. Before we get into that, I'm going to share some Bible verses with you. It's basically going to deal with the currencies, the Federal Reserve currency, the IRS, and these scandals that are going on. And I watched most of the video. I turned it off when I got into the whole this is what you can do to save yourself from this or whatever, and I'm just not really into that. I trust God and that He will preserve and give us what we need in these times of troubles. Not to say it's going to be easy, it's going to be rough, it's going to be hard. But that's what we have to really start to focus in on, is not putting our faith in what we can do to protect ourselves, but rather putting our faith in God to supply us with our needs. Like for the clothes on our backs and these types of things when the situation arises. But it's a very alarming video. It's very interesting, and it ties in a lot with Scripture and what's going on. It ties in with the increase of the black horse riding or continuing its ride. And one thing I want to let you know is that obviously, our country is, surrounded in debt, and we keep on printing more money to pay off the debt, but it's creating more debt and more debt and more debt. But see, what you got to realize is that, and this video will get into that, and it's very true, is that our dollar is still the world reserve currency. Okay? Let me repeat that. Our dollar is still the world reserve currency. And what does that mean? Well, that basically means that the U.S. can still continue to print money as long as the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Alright? And what has happened over time is the same thing that happened with Britain. Same thing would happen with all these other world powers. Is they started to print off money to try to pay off these debts, or kind of like throw it under the rug, if you will, and that caused inflation. Things got more expensive. You look at the gas prices and everything like that. I mean, you see it around you every day, and it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. But you see it happen in other nations, and like Britain, for example, was the world's reserve currency for a better part of 200 years. Before the U.S. dollar became the world reserve currency. And so when certain people talk about the United States and the dollar and everything like that, they have every right to, because the dollar is it's the world reserve currency. I mean, that's all I can say about that. You lose that, then the majority of the world is going to be in trouble, and especially the United States. So I don't know what else to say on that regard. Other than that, it is what it is. I mean, you can't change it. Prophecy is going to be fulfilled, whether you like it or you don't like it. And, that's that. Revelation 6:5 says, "And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, 'Come and see.' And I beheld, and lo, a black horse, and he that sat on him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the four beasts say, A measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." Obviously, we see a two-part portion in this verse. Oil and wine is basically a symbol of the Holy Spirit, and the wine is a symbol of the blood that Jesus or Yahshua has shed for us. And so that we are covered under the blood. So obviously that there's a covering for those that have the Holy Spirit, and the blood of Jesus covering their lives for those that accept Him. See thou hurt not the oil and the wine. So there's a spiritual lesson to be learned in that little verse, as well as the economic woes and prices rising, and these types of things. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender." Even though that we are the world reserve currency, the US dollar is, we have become a slave to the world. Okay? We have borrowed and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. And we have, from multiple countries. So we are basically the servants to these other countries. And so how do we pay back this debt? Is we continue to print more money, which devalues the dollar, which is basically what they plan on doing anyways. So Isaiah 29:14 through 16 is another very sobering 3 verses here, which says, "Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. Woe unto them that seek deep to hide their counsel from the Lord, and their works are in the dark." Their works are done in secret. You don't see what they're doing. You hear about secret governments and secret societies, what's done in the dark and everything like that. Yeah, that's all true. It's not just conspiracy theory. The Bible says so, therefore it is so. Okay? So, when you hear about all these conspiracy kooks, shouting all these things, chances are there's a lot to back it. Okay? And I have the Word of God to back it. Okay? And they say, "Who seeth us and who knoweth us? Surely your turning of things upside down shall be esteemed as the potter's clay. For shall the work say of him that made it, He made me not? Or shall the thing framed say of him that framed it, He had no understanding?" See, you might be able to hide things from the common folk. You ain't going to hide from God. You ain't going to hide from Yahuwah, the Lord. You ain't going to hide from the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the Word. You're not going to hide from Him. The added phrase, "what's done in the dark is going to be brought to the light." And that goes with the secular rulers of this world as well. And what's going on with the monetary system. See, the thing is like, for example, the whole HARP situation. I'm going to be getting into that on a study regarding the whirlwind. I believe HARP is used on a very routinely basis. And I believe it is the cause of a lot of the major weather anomalies that has been happening within the past month. But the thing is, God is in control. What does that mean? Well, God allows these things to happen. Okay? It's not necessarily the hand of God doing these things, but He's allowing man to further their wicked schemes. And in a sense, what happens is people who see these things happening to them, sometimes they will end up turning to God and they will end up receiving salvation from a type of judgment act that is done. Whether God uses man or not, or whatever. God used Satan to test Job. Is he not more capable to use man and his technology to fulfill his plans? You know? So yes, I do believe full well that HAARP is a cause of a lot of the weather anomalies that have been taking place. Job 24:13-17. They are of those that rebel against the light. They know not the ways thereof. Here's this whole secret thing that we don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, but you basically can kind of get a glimpse of what's going on by looking at what is already happening right now. And they're already ahead of what is happening. I mean, they already got this stuff plotted out and planned out, you know. But God is in control. He ain't got nothing to worry about. Sure, you know, times are going to be rough. It's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of sorrow. There's going to be a lot of pain. But this is just a temporary life. Eternity is a long time, folks. Eternity is a long, long time. And what is it to gain in this life when you have eternity in the next? Okay? It's foolishness to rely on the ways of this world to get you by. All right. Yes, there are things we do to prepare, and we have to think logically. We have to, you know, use our brains. Yes, obviously. Learn from the ant, you sluggard, and look at Noah. Okay, he prepared and did all these things. So it's good to do those things, but not to glory in the things of this world, because regardless of what you're doing, you're still relying on the world's resources to get you by. And if you're doing it without the Lord, it's going to profit you nothing, because you're still going to be your eternal soul is still going to be at stake. You know, if you do not have the Lord, I mean, your preparations and stuff is not going to mean nothing. So, but anyways, this is Job 24:13-17. They are of those that rebel against the light. They know not the ways thereof, nor abide in the paths thereof. The murderer rising with the light killeth the poor and needy, and in the night is as a thief. The eye also of the adulterer waiteth for the twilight, saying, No eye shall see me, and disguiseth his face. In the dark they dig through houses, which they had marked for themselves in the daytime. They know not the light, for the morning is to them even as the shadow of death. If one know them, they are in the terrors of the shadow of death. Okay. And in Isaiah 24:1-5, Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the servant, so with his master, as with the maid, so with the mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower. So don't think that the lender is going to escape scot-free with this. I mean, the whole world is going to experience divine judgment. Okay. Obviously, judgment begins in the household of the Lord, and you know, and it carries on, so on and so forth. The earth mourneth and fadeth away, the world languisheth and fadeth away. The haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof. Here's the biggie: because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. And and again, when you see these this presentation I'm going to be sharing with you, here comes the storms. bear in mind with these verses, I will provide the verses down below, and I would strongly suggest that you read them. Um, and things are expecting to be heating up here, I believe, very soon. You know, with the whole IRS scandal and these types of things that's going on. So, the video I'm going to be presenting to you is from STANSBURY Investment Advisory. The legal disclaimer says this work is based on SEC filings, current events, interviews, corporate press release, and what we've learned as financial journalists. It may contain errors, and you shouldn't make any investment decisions based solely on what you read here. Okay? So he's not saying he's got all these answers figured out. He's just, by his calculations, this is what he's seen, and this is what he's presenting from what he has observed. Okay? So basically, he's telling you to take it with a grain of salt, but take it into consideration and take what he says seriously. And from a biblical standpoint, when you hear this, understand it and take it seriously and realize the conditions that we face, that we live in, okay? And try to break away from the normalcy bias that you may be suffering from. Which means, oh, this can't happen here, we're too good, we're too... Nothing is good in the sight of God. That is carnal, okay? And this is really what Revelation is. It's a revealing of Jesus Christ in His Word. And it's also a time of testing and tribulation to purify His bride, to overcome our fleshly desires. And we will be tested. And we will be put through the fire. Because a lot of us, including myself, need it. So, soak in the presentation, and leave me your thoughts and comments below. Truth be told, truth be known, stay safe, God bless, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay, I just wanted to apologize for not being able to get the video uploaded attached to my opening statements, so I'm just going to have to do the voiceover of this, of the transcript of the presentation that Porter Stansbury did recently. I don't know, I kept on trying to attach the video and it wouldn't play all the way through. It kept on sticking and stopping, and so hopefully this way, just by me reading the entire presentation, hopefully it'll work better this way and you'll be able to get the full grasp. Plus I got some other things I want to share with you in regards to this situation. So the presentation started like this. A wealthy Maryland journalist who's neither a Democrat or Republican has exposed a scandal brewing within the current administration. Now, I'm just going to read this article as is. There's only going to be like one or two times where I'm going to stop and show you some other things regarding this subject. He has exposed a scandal brewing within the current administration. He says it could ruin Obama's entire presidency and would also result in some of the most dramatic changes to ordinary American life in more than 50 years. Dear fellow American, hello, my name is Porter Stansbury. 14 years ago, I founded Stansbury & Associates Investment Research and has since become the largest firm of its kind in the world. We specialize in financial research and serve hundreds of thousands of paid subscribers in more than 120 countries. You may know of our firm because of the work we did over the last several years, helping investors avoid the big disasters associated with Wall Street's collapse. We warn people to avoid Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers, General Motors, and dozens of other companies that have since collapsed. We even helped our subscribers find opportunities to profit from these moves by shorting stocks and buying put options. To my knowledge, no other research firm in the world can match our record of correctly predicting the catastrophe that occurred in 2008 and the rebound that has occurred since then. The video presentation we created 3 years ago to explain the financial crisis and our thoughts on what would happen next has become the most watched online financial video in history as far as we can tell. But that's not why I created this follow-up presentation. I reference our success and experience with Wall Street's latest crisis because we believe there is an even bigger crisis lurking, something that will shake the very foundation of America. I know that to most people, the situation seems to be getting better. Stocks have recovered nearly all their losses, real estate has rebounded, unemployment and bankruptcies have dropped, but here's the thing. The unfortunate reality is that we are actually in a much more dangerous and precarious place today than we were 5 years ago. And that is why I've spent a significant amount of time and money in the past few months preparing this presentation. In short, I want to talk about a specific event that will take place in America's very near future, which could actually bring our country and our way of life to a grinding halt. This looming crisis is related to the financial crisis of 2008, but it is infinitely more dangerous, as I'll explain in this letter. As this problem comes to a head, I expect there will be a near complete shutdown of the American economy. Life as we have known it for more than 40 years will essentially cease to exist. Our governments on both the federal and state level will shut down. Banks will not open. Businesses will at least temporarily shutter their doors. I expect we'll see martial law enforced by the U.S. military. Believe me, I don't make this prediction lightly, and I have no interest in trying to scare you. I'm simply following my research to its logical conclusion. I did the same when I tracked Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's accounting, also with General Motors, Lehman Brothers, and the rest. And when I began giving this warning in 2006, no one took me very seriously, not at first. Back then, most mainstream commentators just ignored me. And when I presented my case and exposed the facts at economic conferences, they got angry. They couldn't refute my research, but they weren't ready to accept the enormity of its conclusion either. That's why before I go any further, I have to warn you. What I am going to say is controversial. It will offend many people, Democrats, Republicans, and Tea Partiers alike. In fact, I've already received dozens of pieces of hate mail. And the ideas and solutions I'm going to present might seem somewhat radical to you at first, perhaps even un-American. My guess is that as you read this letter, you'll say, there's no way this could really happen, not here. Just remember, no one believed me 4 years ago when I said the world's largest mortgage banker, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, would soon go bankrupt. And no one believed me when I said GM would soon be bankrupt as well, or that the same would happen to General Growth Properties, the biggest owner of mall property in America. But again, that's exactly what happened. No one believed me in 2011 when I said the crisis would cause riots in the streets. Then came the protests in Wisconsin and the Occupy Wall Street movement all over the country. And that brings us to today. The same financial problems I've been tracking from bank to bank and from company to company for the last 6 years have now found their way into the U.S. Treasury. I'll explain how this came to be. What it means is critically important to you and every American. The next phase in this crisis will threaten our very way of life. The savings of millions will be wiped out. This disaster will change your business and your work. It will dramatically affect your savings accounts, investments, and retirement. It will change everything about your normal way of life. Where you vacation, where you send your kids or grandkids to school, how and where you shop, the way you protect your family and home. I'll explain how I know these events are about to happen. You can decide for yourself if I'm full of hot air. As for me, I'm more certain about this looming crisis than I've been about anything else in my life. I am literally afraid for my family's future, and I have taken drastic steps to prepare for what I know must inevitably happen next. I know that debts don't just disappear. I know that bailouts have big consequences. And unlike most of the pundits on TV, I know a lot about finance and accounting. And this is all coming to a head much, much sooner than most Americans think. Of course, the most important part of this situation is not what is happening, but rather what you can do about it. In other words, will you be prepared when the biggest financial crisis in America in more than 50 years hits? Don't worry, I'm not organizing a rally or demonstration. and I've turned down every request to run for a political office. Instead, I want to show you exactly what I'm doing personally to protect my family and to protect and perhaps even grow my money, and how you can prepare as well. You see, I can tell you with near 100% certainty that most Americans will not know what to do when commodity prices, things like milk, bread, and gasoline, soar. They won't know what to do when banks close and their credit cards stop working, or when they're not allowed to buy gold or foreign currencies, or when food stamps fail, or their Social Security checks come to a halt. In short, our way of life in America is about to change. I promise you. In this letter, I'll show you exactly what is happening and why it is inevitable. Again, you can challenge every single one of my facts and you'll find that I'm right about each allegation I make. Then I hope you'll take action for yourself. Will you act now to protect yourself and your family from the catastrophe that's brewing right now in Washington, D.C.? I hope so. That's why I wrote this letter. I'm going to walk you through exactly what I am doing personally and what you can do as well. I can't promise you'll emerge from this crisis completely unharmed, but I guarantee you'll be a lot better off than people who don't follow these simple steps. But I'm getting ahead of myself just a bit. Let me back up and show you in the simplest terms possible what is going on, why I am so concerned, and what I believe will happen in the next 12 months. The greatest danger America has ever faced? I believe that we as Americans are about to see a major collapse in our national monetary system, our normal way of life. Basically, for many years now, our government has been borrowing so much money, very often using short-term loans, that very soon we will no longer be able to afford even the interest on these loans. Again, I say these things as an expert in accounting and financial research. You may not think things are that bad in the U.S. economy, but consider this simple fact from the University of New Mexico Bureau of Business and Economic Research. Even if all U.S. citizens were taxed 100% of their income for an entire year, that's every penny earned by every citizen in the entire country, it would still not be enough to pay off our debts, not even close. We'd still be trillions of dollars short. That's absolutely incredible, isn't it? Yet I've never seen this fact reported anywhere else, and right now, today, the federal government has to borrow 46 cents of every dollar they spend. Spending that stands at a staggering average of $435.8 million per hour. How is that possibly sustainable? Normally, I study these kinds of numbers when I'm looking at a business to invest in or to recommend to my readers. But lately, I've spent most of my time looking into our national balance sheet because as the banking system collapsed in 2008, all of the bad debts were absorbed by the world's governments, and it continues to this day. We began the year 2013 with a net public debt that has more than doubled since the year before Barack Obama took office. These overwhelming public financial obligations are completely unprecedented in the history of our country, outside of the two major global wars we fought in the 20th century. Now I'm going to show you what he means by this. Here is the USDebtClock.org. Okay, we are right now. Obviously, it's continuing to go up. We are nearing the 17 trillion mark. Okay, we're at 16,864,000,000,000. 16.8 trillion, essentially. Okay. When Obama took office in 2008, from 2008, let me back this up here. Yeah, see, this just shut down on me. Okay. So you can see here, right now we are currently at 16 trillion, 16.8 trillion. Alright. If we go all the way back to the year 2000, We were at 5.7 trillion on the U.S. national debt. Okay, the presidency of George Bush from 2000 to 2008. This is just rough estimate because it's going by on this day, but from 2000 to 2008. Okay, so from 2000 to 2008, roughly roundabout, um, the entire 2 terms of President Bush, under President Bush, uh, the debt increased by 4 trillion. Okay, we are now in, so that's only a $4 trillion, that's a $4 trillion increase. Okay, uh, from 2008 to 2013. Bear in mind, this is only the beginning of Obama's second term. Okay, so this is 4.5 years into it, basically. Under the Obama administration, we have piled up in just the first 5 years of his presidency. Uh, 10, just over $7.2 trillion, just in his first 4 years alone. So that's basically expected to double. Probably by the end of his second term, we will probably be roughly over 22 to 25 trillion dollars in debt. Okay, and this stuff just cannot keep on going without some huge currency catastrophe happening to the point of hyperinflation, and the fact that we're going to need a new world reserve currency, and when that happens, we can't print no more money. Therefore, we end up, paying for a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow of cash, with Zimbabwe money, essentially. And then you're going to have your new world reserve currency and stuff like that, and that falls in line with the whole mark of the beast. And this is also the whole aspect of the black horse, of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So, I mean, this is because the U.S. dollar is connected with the world. Okay, it's the world's reserve currency, and we're going to get into that right now. All right, and this is how important this really is. So continuing on with the report, but even these incredible figures don't tell the real story, or even half of it. Various other government agencies and private companies taken over by the government also have obligations of nearly another $5 trillion. We've already booked complete losses on $140 billion worth of these obligations, yet they remain completely off the federal balance sheet. When you add these other genuine federal obligations that exist right now, today you come up with a total debt figure that's much more than $20 trillion. Far more than half of these debts were assumed under President Obama. We don't know what the full burden of these new and existing debts will be in total over time. That's because the Federal Reserve power to manipulate interest rates is unlimited. At least for now, that's the case. We don't know how much of Fannie's and Freddie's bad debts will eventually be covered by the U.S. Treasury. We do know they have an unlimited line of credit, so it's a safe bet that we haven't seen the last of these charges. Finally, we have no idea what the eventual cost of this Federal Reserve's ongoing expansion of the monetary base will be over the long term. There is one thing that's certain. However, these debts will not be free. They will carry a burden. Today we have more government debt than any country in the history of the world. We have more debt than every country in the European Union combined. With each additional commitment, we sink further and further into debt, closing in upon the moment that we can simply no longer afford even the interest payments on our obligations. And here's the part that really matters. The cost of maintaining our debts are about to skyrocket. Right now, the Federal Reserve is manipulating interest rates down to almost zero. As a result, the interest rates at which our government can borrow money is at a record low level. In fact, the Federal Reserve has lowered its benchmark interest rate 10 times since August of 2007, from 5.25% to a zone between 0 and 0.25%. Obviously, the current rate won't last forever. But what will happen if the average real interest rate ends up being just 4% annually, and we pay it off over 30 years like a mortgage? Incredibly, we'll spend $34.3 trillion to simply repay what we owe right now. If the rate ends up being 6%, we'll spend $43.1 trillion. Now, of course, our politicians believe that through policy and currency manipulation, they can simply avoid paying any of these costs. They can order the Federal Reserve to prevent interest rates from ever rising to a level that will cost the American people anything. They believe they can manage the economy so the debts of Fannie and Freddie won't go bad. They believe without any proof whatsoever that they can stimulate the economy by even more deficit spending so that it grows faster, allowing tax revenues to produce a surplus. Repaying these debts, they say, will be easy and painless. But you know better, my friend. You must know better. The wages of sin must be paid, and they will be paid. Just consider the plans of those who argue otherwise. Paul Krugman, one of the most widely read and respected economists in the country, wrote about this incredibly naive and ridiculous solution in a January 7th, 2013 New York Times column. He said, quote, "There's a legal loophole allowing the Treasury to mint platinum coins in any denomination the Secretary chooses. Yes, it was intended to allow commemorative collector's items, but that's not what the letter of the law says, and by minting a $1 trillion coin, then depositing it at the Fed, the Treasury could acquire enough cash to sidestep the debt ceiling while doing no economic harm at all," end quote. Very few people, even our most influential economists, seem to remember that the utility of money and credit are based upon their soundness. Money allows people to exchange goods and services widely, greatly increasing the specialization of labor and facilitating the economic magic of competitive advantage. Money also plays a critical function of facilitating communications between and among many disparate actors. Price changes guide producers and consumers. But when the money can't be trusted, the entire system breaks down. The price signals can't be relied upon, and it becomes harder and harder for people to exchange labor and capital. Likewise, credit enables an economy to grow by facilitating the growth of savings and capital investments through real interest rates. But very few people are willing to delay consumption and trust their savings in an economy that refuses to pay savers any return above inflation for their savings. And that's exactly where we are today. Although to most Americans everything seems calm, and that we are enjoying an economic recovery, I can promise you this: we are trapped, and there is no way out. And nobody in Washington, not Republicans, not Democrats, and not even Tea Partiers, want you to realize how precarious our government's finances really are. They can't afford for you to understand this dilemma or what it means. Because here's the thing, and this is the big secret the government hopes you never understand. According to even my most conservative calculations, again using numbers provided by the Congressional Budget Office, a debt default by the U.S. government would be inevitable were it not for one simple anomaly. The one thing that has saved the United States so far. I'm talking about our country's unique abilities to simply print more money. You see, the U.S. government has one very important weapon to use in this crisis so far. And let me repeat that, so far. We are the only debtor in the world who can legally print U.S. dollars. And the U.S. dollar is what's known as the world's reserve currency. The dollar forms the basis of the world's financial systems. It is what banks around the world hold in reserve against their loans. Again, that's a secret most politicians don't understand. And as things stand now, the U.S. government can go broke in any ordinary sense of the word because it can simply print dollars to pay for its bad debts. It's been doing so since March of 2009. That might sound pretty good at first since we can always just print more money. What is there to worry about? Well, let me show you why our biggest advantage is about to disappear. You see, as things stand today, America is the only country in the world that doesn't have to pay for its imports in a foreign currency. Here's what I mean. Let's say you're a German and you want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. You can't just pay for your oil in German marks or the new euro currency because oil is priced in dollars. So you have to buy dollars first, then buy your oil. And that means the value of the German currency is of great importance to the German government. To maintain the value of its currency, Germans must produce at least as much as they consume from around the world, otherwise the value of its currency will begin to fall, causing prices to rise and its standard of living to decline. But in America, we've been able to consume as much as we want without worrying about acquiring the money to pay for it, because our dollars are accepted everywhere around the world. In short, for decades now, we haven't had to produce anything or export anything to get all the dollars we needed to buy all the oil and other goods our country required. All we had to do was borrow and print more money. And boy did we. Take a look at this chart. And as I showed you on the US national debt clock, I mean, this is where we're at right now, 16 trillion. Here's another chart. Basically, this is the start of 2012, right here. Or at 2012, this is about 2013 right here. By the start of 2012, we were roughly at around 14 trillion. So obviously he's got the arrow pointing here. We are in way over our heads, and that's very, very true. Even as late as the 1970s, America was the world's largest creditor. But by the mid-1980s, we became a debtor to the world. And since the late 1990s, we've been the world's largest debtor. Today, our government owes more money to more people than anyone else in the world. With all these bad debts piling up, we've had to begin repaying our debts by printing trillions of new dollars. With QE3, the latest round of quantitative easing, the Fed is now promising to print $85 billion a month. That's over $1 trillion a year. And now finally the impact of this is being felt in a big way. As our creditors figure out what's happening, we are beginning to have very, very big problems. I believe our creditors, which include foreign countries and other investors here and abroad, will either completely stop accepting dollars in repayment or greatly discount the value of these new dollars. I'm sure you think that sounds crazy, but as I'll show you, it is already happening. In fact, Zhao Gang, a researcher at the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, recently said, the shortcomings of the current international monetary system pose a big threat to China's economy. That's why China is now actively taking steps to phase out the U.S. dollar because of its frustration with the U.S. government's mismanagement of our currency. And how does our government respond? And we have the audacity to label China a currency manipulator? Do you see the irony here? As a result of what our government is doing today, I'm confident we will soon see an end of the U.S. dollar standard. In fact, I'm 100% sure of it. It's not a matter of if, but when. And I think it's going to happen much, much sooner than most people think. Of course, I'm not the only one saying this. Even some mainstream publications like the New York Post are recognizing the inevitability of this event. The Post recently reported that the U.S. dollar is getting perilously close to losing its status as the world's reserve currency. Should it cross a line, the 2008 financial crisis could look like a summer storm. And billionaire Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates, the largest and best performing hedge fund in the world, told CNBC that it is inevitable that the dollar's role as the world's currency will diminish from the dominant world currency to one of a few. Quote, it will fade probably fairly quickly, so the United States, which accounts for almost 2/3 of the reserves, will probably go down to 50% of the world's reserves. Keep in mind the U.S. dollar has been the world's reserve currency for decades now, so Most Americans don't have a clue about what the repercussions are of losing this status. And maybe you think it could never happen, but the truth is this is exactly what happens when countries get too far in debt, or when they consume too much or produce too little. In fact, the same thing happened to Great Britain in the 1970s. First Britain, now America. Most people don't know this, but Britain's sterling was the reserve currency for most of the world for nearly 200 years. For most of the 18th and 19th centuries. It continued to play this role until after World War II, when America was forced to prop up Britain's economy with foreign aid. Remember the famous Marshall Plan, when we gave billions to help European countries rebuild? Unfortunately, though, Britain pursued a socialist national agenda. The government took over all the major industries. Like Barack Obama, Britain's leaders wanted to spread the wealth around. Pretty soon the country was flat broke. The final straw for Britain came in 1967, when things got so bad, the Labour Party, the Socialists, decided to devalue the British currency by 14% overnight. They believed this would make it easier for people to afford their debts. But in reality, what it did was make anyone holding British sterling 14% poorer overnight, and it made everything in Britain much, much more expensive in the coming years. And for the country as a whole, it ushered in one of the worst decades in modern British history. Most Americans don't know about Britain's winter of discontent. In the late 1970s, when the government put a freeze on wages, there were continuous strikes in nearly every sector. Gravediggers, trash collectors, even hospital workers. Things got so bad at one point that many hospitals were reduced to accepting emergency patients, and mothers giving birth had to bring their own linens. In 1975, inflation in Britain skyrocketed to 26.9% in a single year. The government also imposed what was known as the 3-day week in 1974. In short, businesses were limited to using electricity for only 3 specified consecutive days each week, and they were prohibited from working longer hours on those days. Think about those smart meters that's going up all over the place. They control how much electricity you can use. Television companies were required to cease broadcasting at 10:30 p.m. to save electricity. Just how bad were things exactly? Well, here's a photo of the garbage that piled up because they didn't have enough money to pay trash collectors a fair wage. And this was in 1974. Imagine, Britain was a global superpower for 150 years. But when they started intentionally devaluing their currency, things went straight downhill. It's now obviously clear that the same thing that happened to Britain's sterling when it was the world's reserve currency is now happening to the US dollar. In fact, the exchange value of the US dollar has fallen nearly 10% since June of 2010, and its rate of decline is accelerating. As the US dollar continues to lose its position as the world's currency, gas, oil, and other commodities will continue to skyrocket. Almost everything we consume will get dramatically more expensive. All the clothing, furniture, and household goods we import from China. All the food we get from Central and South America. All the electronics, televisions, computers, and cars we get from Asia and Europe. And when you look back over the past few years, the numbers are startling. The chart below shows how much a few key commodities have skyrocketed in price just since the beginning of 2009. And then here you can see the chart, and you see like copper, silver, corn. Silver is just like boomed. And it's kind of leveled off a little bit, but it's still a lot higher than it was before 2009. So I mean, and plus on top of that, with the manipulation that's going on in the commodity prices, putting a whole downward spiral on silver. That's also another key point that things are really starting to get bad. There's another article I'm going to be sharing with you guys once I create my news channel that will kind of point to that. So the point here is simple. As we print more money, the price of the world's more essential commodities have soared. This is not a coincidence. Around the world, as we print, prices soar. citizens protest, governments get overthrown, and it's only going to get worse. Because here's the important fact you simply must understand about the United States right now. Our government cannot stop printing money because there is no possible way for us to actually afford our existing debts. No one wants you to know this. No one. That's why, despite the obvious inflation going on all around the world, the Fed continues to say there's no inflation at all. And that's the scary part to me. Just like in a third world country, the government is radically devaluing the dollar and simply lying to everyone about what is really happening. Whether you realize it or not, there is already a run on the dollar. Many of our creditors, like the Chinese, are getting out of the dollar as fast as they can via strategic commodities like copper, gold, and oil. That's partly why commodity prices are soaring. Unfortunately, skyrocketing commodity prices are just the beginning. There are other disastrous consequences to the U.S. dollar losing status as the world's currency. For example, as demand for U.S. dollars around the globe decreases, interest rates will skyrocket. Instead of getting a mortgage at today's incredibly low rate of around 3%, it might cost you 8% or even 10% or 15%. Imagine what that would do to housing prices. Stock prices will likely plummet by at least 40% in a matter of weeks as a result of this event in the currency markets. We had a small taste of this in 2011. But believe me, it's going to get much, much worse from here. As investment banker and best-selling author James Rickards writes in his new book, Currency Wars, quote, "If the currency collapses, everything else goes with it. Stocks, bonds, commodities, derivatives, and other investments are all priced in a nation's currency. If you destroy the currency, you destroy all markets and the nation," end quote. That's the harsh reality we are facing. And it's what no politician will ever tell you. What's happening over the past few years is that investors are finally wising up to the mess that we are in. This is why countries like Germany are taking nearly all their gold stored around the world and bringing it back home. They are worried, and they have every right to be. In the financial world, they refer to this as capital flight. And what it means is when people figure out that their savings in US dollars are in jeopardy, they look for better and safer alternatives. This is why gold prices have gone up for 12 straight years. As far as we are aware, no other asset has ever gone up for 12 straight years in the history of our nation. But remember, we are not the first to go through this. When Germans realized their currency was being destroyed in the 1920s, they got their money into Swiss francs and gold as quickly as possible. When Argentinians realized their currency was being destroyed in recent years, they did the same by moving money as quickly and as quietly as possible into a safer currency and into hard assets like land and precious metals. And it's the same with the US dollar right now. As it continues to lose its position as the world's reserve currency, it will cause a brutal downturn in our economy, which will be about 10 times worse than the mortgage crisis of 2008. Remember, we bailed ourselves out of the last crisis by simply printing trillions and trillions of new dollars. In a currency crisis, that's not possible. Printing money only makes the situation worse. Again, I'm not the only one saying this. As Barron's reported, quote, "The demand for dollars from the rest of the world has been of inestimable benefit to the U.S. economy. It quite simply allows Americans to consume more than they produce and save less than they invest. In other words, to live beyond our means." And listen to what Sem Zell, the 60th richest man in America, according to Forbes magazine, said on a rare interview with CNBC. Zell said, "My single biggest financial concern is the loss of the dollar as the reserve currency. I can't imagine anything more disastrous to our country. I'm hoping against hope that ain't going to happen. But you're already seeing things in the markets that are suggesting that confidence in the dollar is waning. I think you could see a 25% reduction in the standard of living in this country if the US dollar was no longer the world's reserve currency. That's how valuable it is," end quote. You see, what will also happen as a result of this looming currency crisis and the end of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency is a massive inflation in America, the likes of which we have never seen before. When everyone is trying to get rid of their US dollars and our federal government just continues printing more, the crisis will reach epic proportions. Remember, we as Americans are not immune to the basic laws of economics and finance. Over the past 100 years, many other governments have tried to do what our government is doing today. That is, printing money to pay for insurmountable debts. And in the past 100 years, this type of inflation and debt crisis has reared its ugly head in Germany, Russia, Austria, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Poland, the Ukraine, Japan, and China, just to name a few. Greece has fallen apart. Italy, Ireland, Portugal, and Spain are all in trouble. And now the same process is well underway in the United States. As Bill Gross, founder, managing director, and CIO of PIMCO, wrote recently, quote, "The future price tag of printing $6 trillion worth of checks comes in the form of inflation and devaluation of currencies." End quote. And George Malone of the Wall Street Journal echoed these sentiments when he said, quote, "Indeed, it is unlikely that Americans themselves will escape the inflationary consequence of current Fed policy. The Fed is financing a vast and rising federal deficit, following a practice that has been a surefire prescription for domestic inflation from time immemorial." End quote. It's painfully clear that we have a major problem on our hands. Perhaps we could right the ship if we could drastically reduce costs and cut spending. But that's the exact opposite of what our politicians are doing today. But our political leaders are now on a runaway suicide course. They've come to believe that narrowing the tax base and printing billions and billions of dollars is the formula for prosperity. It has never worked, ever, in human history, and it will never work now. Like I said, these theories have all been tried in many other places around the world. Zimbabwe, Argentina, Germany after World War I, and they never work. No nation in history ever became wealthier by going deeply into debt and then printing the money required to repay the loans. And despite what nearly all politicians seem to think, and what many pop culture economists appear to believe, I 100% guarantee it will not work here either. Unfortunately, the success the Fed has enjoyed so far in expanding the monetary base and manipulating the treasury bond market has greatly emboldened our politicians. But when you take a closer look, you realize that everything on the federal and state level is a complete and absolute mess because our government has been living way beyond its means for so long. Now, is your state as broke as these places? Did you know that according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, a Washington, D.C. based think tank, some 31 states are working to close $55 billion in shortfalls for the 2013 fiscal year? As the Center recently reported, quote, "These gaps are all the more daunting because states' options for addressing them are fewer and more difficult than in recent years." And the Federal Reserve Bank of New York recently found that municipal bond defaults are in fact much greater than rating agencies have reported. Standard & Poor's reported 47 defaults between 1986 and 2011. But according to the New York Fed, there were in fact 2,366, 50 times more. Remember, unlike the federal government, states can't typically run a deficit, so they are taking drastic steps to cut back. For instance, a town in Ohio turned off 766 of the town's 5,200 streetlights, which will remain turned off for 2 years. They hope to save $185,000. Philadelphia announced it is closing 37 schools because the district is out of time and out of options, according to Superintendent William Haidt. Budget crises have prompted states to explore early release options for prisoners. California is scrambling to comply with a Supreme Court order to reduce its inmate population by 30,000 people by mid-2013. which we're already approaching that right now. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie confirmed that this problem is going on all over the country. He told 60 Minutes, quote, "It's not like you can avoid it forever, because it's here now. And we all know it's here, and the federal government doesn't have the money to paper over it anymore, either. For the states, the day of reckoning has arrived. That's it. And it's going to arrive everywhere. Timing will vary a little bit, depending upon which states you're in, but it's coming. We spent too much on everything. We spent too much. We spent money we didn't have. We borrowed money just crazily. The credit cards maxed out, and it's over. It's over." End quote. This is the governor. This is the governor of New Jersey. So this is one of the big rigs. Okay. And he's even coming out and saying this stuff. That's why Christie and other governors around the country are now introducing bills to slash pension benefits to government employees. As laughable as these steps are, at least they are taking steps in the right direction, making drastic and dramatic changes to save money. And although it's gone almost completely unreported in the mainstream press, 6 U.S. communities were actually forced to declare bankruptcy in 2010. And there were a slew of new municipal bankruptcies in 2011 as well, including Jefferson County, Alabama, which at the time was the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. Of course, that was topped in 2012 when 3 California municipalities declared bankruptcy in a matter of weeks, including the new largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history, Stockton, a city of 290,000 people east of San Francisco. And keep this in mind, only about half the states in the country, 27 in all, allow municipalities to declare bankruptcy. If it were allowed everywhere, I'm sure we'd see twice as many bankruptcies as we're seeing today. But for most places where bankruptcy is not allowed, they just keep kicking the can down the road, rather than address the real problems. In Baltimore, for example, where my firm's offices are headquartered, the city can't legally declare bankruptcy, but that doesn't mean they aren't essentially bankrupt. An independent audit solicited by the mayor recently shows the city will be $2 billion short of the money they need over the next decade. In other words, as one of the local news stations reported, the city of Baltimore is on a path to financial ruin. And the truly amazing thing is that the U.S. federal government is in even worse shape than the local governments. The only reason we haven't seen the full brunt of this crisis yet on the federal level is because we've just continued to pile on more and more debt. The states can't print money, but the federal government can, at least for now. And for the moment, this is all that is preventing a currency collapse of unprecedented proportions. And this is the important point to remember. What most people don't realize is that the U.S. government can only continue printing dollars as long as the U.S. dollar remains the world's reserve currency. I can't stress this enough. I can't either, because it's true. You need to act now in order to protect your assets and grow your savings in the next few years. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how I'm protecting my own money and what I recommend you do. But first, let me show you what exactly is going on right now. Americans don't realize what is already happening. Like I said, most Americans not only don't believe the U.S. dollar could ever lose its spot as the world's reserve currency, they don't even really understand what that means either. But I am here to tell you this is the biggest problem our country now faces, and it is clearly underway. With the rising level of U.S. debt, many countries around the world are questioning the position of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. They want to diversify out of the U.S. dollar as quickly as possible. The latest sign of a move away from the dollar as a reserve currency is that China and South Korea recently came to an agreement that allows firms to settle deals in either the Chinese yen or the South Korea won instead of the U.S. dollar. Quote, the agreement is part of a push among emerging countries to internationalize local currencies after the global financial crisis, end quote, reports Bloomberg. Ellen Wheatley, a global economics correspondent for Reuters, recently wrote, quote, fed up with what it sees as Washington's mainline neglect of the dollar, China is busily promoting the cross-border use of its own currency, the yuan. Displacing the dollar, Beijing says will reduce volatility in oil and commodity prices and belatedly erode the exorbitant privilege the United States enjoys as the issuer of the reserve currency at the heart of a post-war international financial architecture it now sees as hopelessly outmoded. In fact, in the past couple years, China has signed international currency agreements with Germany, Brazil, Russia, Australia, Japan, Chile, the United Arab Emirates, India, and South Africa, end quote. Japan and India also recently signed a currency deal linking their currencies closer together and lessening their dependency on U.S. dollars. These agreements are part of a trend that started a few years ago when a group of the world's most powerful countries, including China, Japan, Russia, and France, got together for a secret meeting without the United States being present or even knowing about the meeting. Veteran Middle East reporter Robert Fisk reported on this evening in Britain's newspaper, The Independent. Here's what he wrote. Now, if you guys remember about that secret meeting that they did, this is all what's tying in together now, here. You know, a lot of people like to read about these things and they just throw it out. It's not like things are going to happen overnight. You read about these things and you remember them. You store them in your head and you think, hey, this is what's going on with the currency crisis and everything like that. Oh yeah, what about that secret meeting? It has a lot to do with that. And a lot of this ties in with Scripture. A lot of this ties in with the black horse, with the pair of balances in his hands. And the very next horse is death. Because without a currency, without a strong currency, you have starvation, wars, rumors of wars, violence, riots, disease epidemics because, you know, it's too expensive to get any health care. This is why this is so closely connected to that black horse. And that's why I titled this video, The Black Horse and the Currency Scandal. Veteran Middle East reporter Robert Fisk reported on this evening in Britain's newspaper, The Independent. Here's what he wrote. Quote, in the most profound financial change in recent Middle East history, Gulf Arabs are planning, along with China, Russia, Japan, and France, to end dollar dealing for oil, moving instead to a basket of currencies including the Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, the euro, gold, and a new unified currency plan for nations in the Gulf Cooperation Council, including Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and Qatar. Fisk also interviewed a Chinese banker who said, quote, these plans will change the face of international financial transactions. America must be very worried. You will know how worried by the thunder of denials this news will generate. End quote. And sure enough, after Fisk published the details of the secret meetings, U.S. officials and central bankers from around the globe denied these plans. But as the old central banking adage goes, how do you know exactly when a currency will be devalued? The answer is right after the head of the central bank goes on television to adamantly deny that any such transactions will occur. And guess who subsequently released a public statement about how the U.S. will not devalue its currency? Yes, you guessed it, U.S. Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. You see, the last thing a central banker wants to do in the midst of a devaluation is to give people a warning before he can devalue. So they have to deny, deny, deny. After the announcement is made, it's too late for citizens and investors to get out. Then, not too long after this secret meeting was held, the International Monetary Fund issued a report on a possible replacement for the dollar as the world's reserve currency. I'm sure you recognize the significance of this event. The IMF, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C., is the intergovernmental organization that oversees the global financial system. They are the most influential financial organization in the world economy. The IMF has proposed replacing the U.S. dollar with something called special drawing rights, or SDRs. SDRs represent potential claims on the currencies of IMF members. SDRs were created by the IMF in 1969 and can be converted into any currency based on a weighted basket of international currencies. When the IMF lends money, it typically does so via SDRs. The IMF also proposed creating SDR-denominated bonds, which could reduce central banks' dependence on U.S. Treasury bonds. One world currency kind of ring a bell? The fund also suggested that certain assets such as oil and gold, which are traded in U.S. dollars, could be priced using SDRs. This is a huge and important step to replace the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. I'm telling you, it's coming, and it's coming much sooner than most Americans expect. Most Americans simply aren't aware of what's being done and said around the world. For example, regarding the world's reserve currency, China issued a report through their state news agency Xinhua stating, quote, international supervision over the issue of U.S. dollars should be introduced, and a new, stable, and secure global reserve currency may also be an option to avert a catastrophe caused by any single country. It's just another sign of this inevitable event, the end of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Any government or investor with any sense is looking to get out of the U.S. dollar as quickly and safely as possible. China and Russia, for example, took one of their first big steps to replace the U.S. dollar back in 2010. China Daily reported, quote, the two countries were accustomed to using other currencies, especially the dollar, for bilateral trade. Since the financial crisis, however, high-ranking officials in both sides began to explore other possibilities, end quote. To settle their ordinary trading of about $50 billion per year, they no longer first convert to U.S. dollars. Since then, China has reached agreements with many other countries. As I mentioned earlier, remember, they've already signed international currency agreements with Germany, Brazil, Russia, Austria, Japan, Chile, the United Arab Emirates, India, and South Africa. What does this mean? Well, it used to be that China had to obtain dollars to buy gas supplies from, say, Russia, but not anymore. And Russia no longer needs U.S. dollars to buy stuff from the Chinese. And this brings us to one of the biggest and most important facts regarding the U.S. dollar. As the dollar loses its place as the world's reserve currency, foreign countries will no longer need to maintain large holdings of dollars. This means we will no longer be able to print as much money as we want, because there will be fewer and fewer people willing to loan us large amounts of money. This move between China and other countries around the world would have been unthinkable 10 years ago, but today it is the new reality. As I am sure you are aware, for years the US dollar has been accepted almost universally around the globe. Heck, many times when I've traveled, I never even bothered to convert to the local currency because I knew everyone would take my dollars. Well, that's simply not the case anymore. Many places no longer accept the dollar. For example, the Seattle Times reports that in Mexico, Americans are no longer allowed to exchange more than $1,500 per month. In India, the country's tourism minister said U.S. dollars will no longer be accepted at the country's heritage tourist sites, like the Taj Mahal, and the U.S. dollar is no longer good anywhere in Cuba. China is moving in the same direction. The New York Times reports, quote, now, many shops in China no longer accept dollar-based credit cards issued by foreign banks. and foreigners cannot convert American dollars into renminbi beyond a given quota. Iran, of course, has already moved all of its reserves out of U.S. dollars, and Kuwait depegged its currency from the dollar a few years ago. That's why you have all of this crazy talk with Iran. All these rumors speculating with Iran nuclear weapons, because they're moving out the U.S. dollar. It's all about money, folks. This isn't Iran wanting to nuke Israel and all this kind of stuff. Okay, this is all. It's currency wars. This is what's going on. This is the asset. This is the stages of World War III, basically. Okay, because after the currency wars, you have World War, and then you have death, and you have famine. Because again, like I said before, without a stable currency, death follows, and that is surely going to happen, according to Scripture. 100% guarantee you that it will happen. There is no turning back from it. It's going to happen. Prophecy says so. Scripture says so. Therefore, it is so. You can't avoid it. It's going to happen. When? I don't know. Sooner rather than later? I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm not here trying to predict dates. But I am telling you it's going to happen. I believe soon. I can't tell you how soon. And the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the world's largest futures and commodities exchange board, now accepts gold to settle futures contracts. Until recently, the exchange typically accepted only U.S. Treasuries and bonds as payment. The guys at the Mercantile Exchange obviously see the writing on the wall. Again, this would have been completely unthinkable 10 years ago, but today, it's a reality, and this trend is going to keep moving incredibly fast. Just look at the actions taken by smart investors. Bill Gross, who probably knows as much about currencies and debt as anyone in the world, runs the world's biggest bond fund. He was quoted by Bloomberg not too long ago saying, quote, "We've told all of our clients that if you only had one idea, one investment, it would be to buy an investment in a non-dollar currency." That should be on top of the list. Jim Rogers, one of the world's most successful multimillionaire investors, writes, quote, "The dollar is not just in decline, it's a mess. If something isn't done soon, I believe the dollar could lose its status as the world's reserve currency and medium of exchange. Something that would lead to a huge decline in the standard of living for U.S. citizens like nothing we've seen in nearly a century." And it could be anywhere from 50 to 75% of a decline of living in this country. And and the way people live beyond their means and the way we have it so good over here, think about a 50 to 75% decline in this nation. And then think about the repercussions, riots, people breaking into your homes, these types of things, all of this going on. Chaos is what it will lead to. Nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom. We will no longer have rumors of war, we'll have flat out war. I know you probably still don't believe we can have a complete currency collapse here in the United States, but think about it. Are we as Americans really immune to the laws of economics and finance? I don't think so. And I'm not the only one saying this. The dollar's days as reserve currency are numbered. Reports the Financial Times. And the Wall Street Journal recently ran a headline saying, "Dollar's reign as world's main reserve currency is near an end." I'm sure I don't have to tell you that Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal are probably the two most respected financial newspapers in the world. They too see the writing on the wall. It's obvious to anyone who has studied any economic history. And the thing is, with the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times, even a few years ago, they wouldn't even put this stuff out. I mean, it's mainstream media, okay? They wouldn't, let you know this kind of stuff, but since now they're coming out and saying this, the mainstream media is starting to come out and say this, talking about it, It just makes you want to think, how close are we of this happening? Because a lot of times when things happen, you know, then the mainstream media will put it out at the last minute before something happens. And here is Wall Street Journal and Financial Times saying, "Oh, the dollar's reign as world's main reserve currency is near an end." When a few years ago, a lot of people were already talking about it, but people didn't want to listen. People didn't want to hear about it. But now, Wall Street Journal and Financial Times is coming out saying it. Mainstream media places are coming out saying that. It's obvious to anyone who has studied any economic history. In every instance throughout history where a government has tried to inflate its debts away, it has ended in disaster. Believe me, it will happen here too. As Jim Rogers says, quote, "History teaches us that such imprudent monetary and fiscal behavior has always led to economic disaster. This is why the World Bank President Robert B. Zoellick, in a speech at the School for Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, recently said, quote, "The United States would be mistaken to take for granted the dollar's place as the world's predominant reserve currency. Looking forward, there will increasingly be other options to the dollar." And this is why the IMF, or International Monetary Fund, recently published a paper calling for a new global world currency. This is why big U.S. companies like McDonald's and Caterpillar have begun introducing what are called dim sum bonds. These are securities denominated in the Chinese currency, the renminbi, by non-Chinese borrowers. In other words, two of the biggest and most successful corporations in America realized that would have an easier time raising money by offering their bonds in a currency other than the U.S. dollar. Do you see where this is all heading? It's no mystery why gold and silver prices are soaring. And as you can see from 2000, and here we go, 2009, 2010, 11, 12, and 2012 and 2013. This is approximately where we're at right now. Gold and silver prices skyrocket when people lose faith in their currency. So what does this tell you? It's not that hard to figure out, folks. Look at the prices in your commodities. Again, remember, this is all a result of capital flight. When people no longer trust a particular currency, they look for better and safer alternatives. Over the past 12 years, gold and silver have been much safer and far more profitable than holding U.S. dollars in the bank. Think about this. Gold prices have gone up for 12 straight years. No other asset in the world, as far as I know, has had a run like this in recent history. And why exactly is gold going up? The number one reason is because savvy investors around the globe realize the U.S. dollar is no longer a safe store of value. The point is, it's not a matter of if the U.S. dollar will lose its status as the world's reserve currency. It's a process that is already underway. And if, over the next few years, you ignore these basic facts, these basic laws of finance and economics, it will simply destroy you. Investors, foreign governments, and large corporations know there are serious problems with the U.S. dollar, so they are fleeing to precious metals, which have historically been very reliable when a country has major currency problems. The good news, at least for those of us who take the time to prepare, is that no matter what happens, I've found several ways for you to protect your savings, and you could even make 3 to 5 times your money over the next few years. I'll show you exactly what to do in a moment, but first let me explain why the collapse of the dollar as the world's reserve currency could happen much sooner than most people expect. And I'm going to be stopping. I'm not going to read into the fact of what you can do to triple your money or whatever. I'll put the link below to the video and to the transcript, and if you want to read further on that, you can. Because, there's... Like I said, this is from a secular source. This isn't like a message of salvation, and he's using a way to triple your finances to save yourself from this mess. But we know that we are heading into the time of Jacob's trouble, and we are in the times of sorrows, and prophecy is going to run its course, and man is not going to change it. Okay, man is not going to change God's plans for his people, for his bride, to purify them. All right, and that's the bottom line. Okay, so let me show you the real state of the U.S. economy. I know many of my friends, colleagues, and family members are still in serious denial about a major currency crisis in the United States, but this is natural. In the world of psychology, they call this the normalcy bias. You see, the normalcy bias actually refers to our natural reactions when facing the crisis. The normalcy bias causes smart people to underestimate the possibility of a disaster and its effects. In short, people believe that since something has never happened before, it never will. We are all guilty of it. It's just human nature. The normalcy bias also makes people unable to deal with a disaster once it has occurred. Basically, people have a really hard time preparing for and dealing with something they have never experienced before. What's scary in the normalcy bias often results in unnecessary deaths and disastrous situations. For example, think about the Jewish populations of World War II. And plus all the other populations, the gypsies and Christians and everything. So as Barton Biggs reports in his book, Wealth, War, and Wisdom, by the end of 1935, 100,000 Jews had left Germany, but 450,000 still remained. Wealthy Jewish families kept thinking and hoping that the worst was over. Quote, many of the German Jews, brilliant, cultured, and cosmopolitan as they were too complacent. They had been in Germany so long and were so well established, they simply couldn't believe there was going to be a crisis that would endanger them. They were too comfortable. They believed the Nazis' anti-Semitism was an episodic event and that Hitler's bark was worse than his bite. They reacted sluggishly to the rise of Hitler for complete, understandable, but tragically erroneous reasons. Events moved much faster than they could imagine. End quote. This is one of the most tragic examples of the devastating effects of the normalcy bias the world has ever seen. Just think about what was going on at that time. Jews were arrested, beaten, taxed, robbed, and jailed for no reason other than the fact they practiced a particular religion. As a result, they were shipped off to concentration camps, their houses and businesses were seized. Yet most Jews still didn't leave Nazi Germany because they simply couldn't believe that things would get as bad as they did. That's the normalcy bias with devastating results. We saw the same thing happen during Hurricane Katrina. Even as it became clear that the levee system was not going to work, tens of thousands of people stayed in their homes directly in the line of the oncoming waves of water. People had never seen things get this bad before, so they simply didn't believe it could happen. As a result, nearly 2,000 residents died. Again, it's the normalcy bias. We simply refuse to see the evidence that's right in front of our face because it is unlike anything we have experienced before. The normalcy bias kicks in and we continue to go about our lives as if nothing is unusual or out of the ordinary. Well, we're seeing the same thing happen in the United States right now during this currency crisis. We have been the world's most powerful country for nearly 100 years. The U.S. dollar has reigned supreme as the world's reserve currency for more than 50 years. Most of us in America simply cannot fathom these things changing. But I promise you this, things are changing, and faster than most people realize. For a moment, just look at a tiny fraction of the evidence around us. 15% of the population on food stamps. Did you know that there are now more than 46 million Americans on food stamps? That's nearly 15% of the entire population. Those numbers are up 65% since 2008, and that translates to roughly 1 in 7 Americans. Can a country really be in good shape when 15% of the population can't even afford to buy food? Or how about this? 43% of American families are essentially broke. According to a recent article on MSN Money, about 43% of American families spend more than they earn each year. Look at this chart. It's unbelievable. Here is the chart right here. The American consumer is broke. Debt per household in America. We are at about $13,000 right now, as it stands in 2013. Americans hold 12.8 trillion in household debt, and of those that's 13 trillion household debt. Americans hold 12.8 trillion in household debt, and of those household carrying debt, the average credit card balance is a whopping $15,422. It's no wonder the U.S. Census Bureau says the median household income in America is actually 8.9% lower today than it was in 1999. So how in the world can we possibly spend our way out of the currency crisis? We certainly can't do it with savings or increasing earnings. The only answer is to print more money, which will hasten the fall of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. And that brings me to the mystery of disappearing jobs. There is simply no one better at bending statistics than the U.S. government. Take the unemployment rate, for example. Back in the 1930s, anyone without a job, but not retired, was considered unemployed. Today, however, the government calculates unemployment mainly by counting the number of people receiving unemployment benefits. So when unemployment benefits expire, people are no longer counted. So they count them as being back at work. And so then you have people like Obama going on the brainwash box saying, hey, everything's fine, the economy's getting better and everything like that, because that's what they're counting. That's how they're manipulating. Their unemployment benefits run out. The government says, okay, he's back to work. Don't have to worry about it. The economy's doing fine. And people believe it. Because people like to believe what they hear on their TV. Because they saw it on TV, therefore they believe it. So when unemployment benefits expire, people are no longer counted, and the unemployment rate actually falls. Ridiculous. I know. If we were to actually believe the government's distorted calculations, unemployment was reported to be 7.8% in December of 2012, according to the Department of Labor. But the reality is the true unemployment rate is much, much higher than what the government is reporting. If you don't believe me, look at 2 job postings I read about recently. In November of 2012, 3,000 people in Chicago stood in line for as long as 4 hours to apply for one of the 55 city jobs on offer. And American Airlines recently announced it was hiring 1,500 new flight attendants, jobs that pay an average of $23,000 per year. 20,000 applicants responded. So many that Americans stopped taking resumes after 8 days. 8 days. The point is, our country is not growing jobs because the government is making it harder and harder for businesses to thrive. And with the current regulations in place, our country will never experience the type of growth necessary to dig our government out of the hole they've put themselves in. I'm sure you think I'm exaggerating, but just look at what the CEO of one of America's most important companies said recently. Intel CEO Paul Otellini said in a speech, quote, I can tell you definitively that it costs $1 billion more per factory for me to build, equip, and operate a semiconductor manufacturing facility in the United States. End quote. He said that 90% of the additional costs are not from higher labor rates, but from higher taxes and regulatory charges, which other nations simply don't impose. Cypress Semiconductor CEO T.J. Rogers agreed that the problem is not higher U.S. wages but anti-business laws. He was quoted he was quoted in an interview with CNET News saying, quote, "The killer factor in California for a manufacturer to create, say, 1,000 blue-collar jobs is a hostile government that doesn't want you there and demonstrates it in thousands of ways," end quote. Few Americans today realize that the United States has overtaken Japan and now has the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world. Why would anyone want to start a business here when they can do it for less money and keep more of the money they make by locating elsewhere? It's just another good reason to avoid the US dollar. So is this. Debt-ridden US companies. Did you know that in 1979 there were 61 American companies that earned top-level AAA credit ratings from Moody's? Today there are only 4. Automatic Data Processing, ExxonMobil, Johnson & Johnson, and Microsoft. Does this sound like an economic recovery to you when only 4 companies in the entire country are stable enough to earn a AAA credit rating? Me neither. And think about this. Can you really have any AAA rated companies in a country where the government is not AAA rated? I don't have the answer for that, and so far these companies have not been downgraded along with the US government. But remember, most of their assets are in US dollars, so it could soon mean big problems for these companies as well, even though they've been as conservative and responsible as possible with their finances. That's the thing you need to remember. It doesn't matter if you personally have a good credit rating or very little debt. When the US dollar goes down as the world's reserve currency, it's going to have disastrous effects for every American and for nearly every asset in America. You simply must take some simple steps to protect yourself as much as possible. This currency crisis is going to get much, much worse. It's going to make the mortgage crisis of 2008 look like a walk in the park. Almost every state in the country is on the verge of bankruptcy. The federal government has borrowed an impossible amount of money, which will never be able to pay back. Our economy is an absolute mess. Taxes are sky high already, and now that President Obama has won a second term, they will likely go much higher over the next few years. Plus, nearly all of the world's major financial players are preparing for an alternative to the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. To me, it is so obvious that we are about to experience a serious currency crisis. I can't believe people can deny this reality with a straight face, and I think that's part of the problem. Today, it's not uncommon to find editorials in some of the most respected publications like the New York Times and Forbes stating that it's impossible for the U.S. to have a debt crisis. But I promise you, the people making such idiotic claims today are going to be humiliated when this all unfolds. They'll be just like the guy pumping internet stocks in 1999, or the guy saying real estate could never go down in 2003. In hindsight, it will appear to be so obvious, yet today, for most people, the idea of the US dollar collapsing is still an unfathomable event. And if you still have your own doubts that this could really occur, just take another look at the price of gold and silver compared to the US dollar over the past decade. And it shows you the graph again. And think about this. The only reason people buy precious metals like gold and silver is because they realize there are major problems with saving money in ordinary currencies. And since 2000, gold is up more than 500%, while silver is up around 600%. I mean, how high do precious metal prices have to go before the average American realizes how serious this problem is? To me, it's clear that investors would rather hold gold and silver than US dollars. Anyone with any sense or basic understanding of economics can tell the US dollar is doomed, and as it continues to collapse, it's going to have major repercussions, yet most Americans are completely clueless about what this all means. In fact, do this at the next party you attend. Ask a group of people their thoughts on the US dollar losing its position as the world's reserve currency. I know for a fact people will look at you like you're speaking complete gibberish. But the dollar will lose its position as the world's reserve currency. I guarantee it. And like I said, it's all going to happen much sooner than most people think. In fact, it's already underway. So, I'm going to stop right there. It was kind of rough to get through. It was pretty long. So that's basically it. And when you tie all this in with Scripture, and with the Scriptures I gave you at the beginning of this, um, this has the earmarks of the black horse all over it. And so I figured I needed to come out here and share this with you. Um, but I will be posting the links below. You can go and check this stuff out for yourself. I'll have the scriptures posted below too, and stay tuned. Um, I'm hoping to get my teaching series up here shortly, and I got some other things I'm doing for a subscriber of mine, um, and or a person I'm subscribed to, um, and so I got that going on. So just be on the lookout. I'll be posting stuff up here eventually, and I'll have my other channel opened up soon as well. So until next time, guys, truth be told, truth be known, stay safe, God bless. Thank you for bearing with me on this long article here, but I think it was really important to share this. So you guys take it easy, and have a good day or night. God bless. Bye-bye.